Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Optimize Your QAD Database Performance with Pro2 Archive. Just wanted to give you a quick reminder to use the chat feature in the session room for any questions. We'll also be going live on a Zoom, so be sure to click the link following the presentation to join in the discussion. Before we jump in, I wanted to quickly introduce you to your speaker for today, Mike Fergel. Mike Fergel started his career at Progress in 1989 in development. He has held many different roles during the time, including working on the OpenEdge database product and managing different development teams working on the OpenEdge database. In 2012, he joined the consulting team at Progress as Director of Database Services, where he and his team are responsible for managing over 2,000 distinct databases and over 140 terabytes of data with 175,000 connected users. As a former developer of the OpenEdge database, Mike brings a unique perspective as both a customer of the OpenEdge technology and also a developer of the same technology. Mike has presented highly technical topics around the world at nearly all of Progress conferences and PUGs. And now I'm going to turn over to Mike to start the presentation. Mike.
Thank you very much, Susan. So today we're talking about our Pro2 Archive product. It's really a product and a service. And this is the agenda we're going to walk through. We're going to talk about data challenges for QAD, what exists today, what Pro2 Archive is, and it is actually a combination of two existing products, one called the Automation Delete Utility, often known as ADU, and our Pro2 Replication Technology. And at the end, as Susan says, we'll take questions. So let's get started right away. So what are the data challenges that we have? Historical data by definition grows. I can tell you from being in this OpenEdge space for the last 30 years that the delete keyword is the most least used keyword in the language. People add, people update, they create, but they never want to delete. So when data is not deleted, the database grows. So historical data remains in the database gets larger, it requires more disk space, it causes performance problems because now the database no longer can fit in memory. And then I guess the most important aspect of this is that the maintenance operations take longer. Backups are longer, dump and loads are longer. Anything that you need to do to maintain the database is going to take longer as the database is bigger. So what should you do? You should do regular archiving because that maintains the database size. This provides consistent performance all year round. It's not like it performed better in January and worse in December. If the database size remains constant, then the performance of the application will run the same both January and December. And you'll get those consistent backup times, you'll get the consistent restore times, you'll get the consistent dump and load times. So all those maintenance operations become predictable. Sounds great. Why don't people archive data? The most common reason why is for financial reporting. The finance people never want to delete. They want to be able to look back in time as far back as they can to be able to do comparisons of finances decades ago compared to where they are today. Another very common reason for not archiving data is regulatory requirements. A lot of people running QAD have strict guidelines as to when they can get rid of the data that's in their database. They have to hold data for 7 years, 10 years, 12 years, and that's for regulatory reasons. So that by itself puts fear into people to not delete data out of the database. So now you're saying, well, I want to go delete data out of the database, but what should I delete? What can I delete? When can I delete it? What are the guidelines? If I can archive data out and have a mechanism to look at it later, when should I do this? Should I archive data that's 2 years old? Should I archive data that's 4 years old? What are the guidelines? And because of this, it's not part of the daily operations. And even more so, it's not even easy to do. So Progress created this automation delete utility, the ADU utility. So what this is it's a front end to the existing QAD archiving process. So QAD has an archiving process built into their application, but it's seldom used. It's seldom used mostly because it's a menu option. It takes manual input to be able to go run through the menus, get to this one, and then put boundaries on what types of data and what types of date ranges you want to archive. So what the ADU utility does is it front ends that, so you don't have to go through the menus. You configure this once, you establish retention rules, and then it goes and does the deletions for you. and it tracks and monitors the activity, and everything is automated. So if there's problems, we have log files and success of whether it completed successfully or not. So this, and also another thing about the ADU that, or the archive utility that comes from QAD, is the files that QAD creates, you have no control over the names of the files. They're going to be date timestamped for when you dumped out the data, which may not be what you want all the time. So this will take that file and make it a name that makes sense to you. And then in the QAD best practice for archiving, you now need to create another QAD database and load the data into that QAD database. So now you have two databases. You have the live production database and you have your archive database, which we'll talk more about that in a minute. So just to compare and contrast the QAD standard archive tool, it's a recap of a lot of what I've said. It requires manual execution. You have to manually change the dates. You have to figure out what the general ledger boundaries are. You have to rename the files that it generates to give it a meaningful name, and you have no control over the execution. It's a lot of manual process. You take the ADU and it just automates everything. The product's been around for more than a decade, used by many customers, and this is it. And the benefit of this is it's at the front end that you configure, you set it, and you forget it. You don't have to worry about performance on the system because it can throttle itself. It checks for after image file size, before image file size, disk space to make sure that it's not going to exceed any threshold or cause any performance problems, or worse, an outage of the QAD database while it's running. So now you've archived the data. Where does the data sit? Well, the data sits on the file system in an HST file, which by itself is not of any use. So as I mentioned before, you need to create another database, another QAD instance, and load the HST files in there. So now you have your production database and you have a historical database that you've loaded the HST files into. So the production database holds all the current data, the archive database holds all the historical data. Now the big question is, where do you run your reports? What if you need to run a report that's going to cross the boundary between the two databases? Let's take a scenario where you're archiving anything older than 2 years out of the database. So anything older than 2 years is in the archive database. Everything current is between 2 years and now is in the production database. Let's say you need to go run a report that's going to go back 3 years. How do you do it? Well, you can do it. You'd have to run the report on the production database to get the 2 years of data. Then you'd run another report on the archive database to get 1 year, and then you're going to have to concatenate those together, which is not easy most times. So hence, we came up with this Pro2 archive product. What this does, it replicates all data, current and historical, to a replicated reporting database. This is where you run all the reports. So the production database holds the current data, and the reporting database holds not just the archive data, but all the data. So it's holding the current database, replicated data, as well as everything that's been archived out of the database. So you go through your normal ADU process, and the current production database items get deleted out of those databases, but it does not get deleted out of the archive database. So we automatically build this archive database so we don't have to worry about those HST files. And now you have a complete database for historical purposes that is static read-only, so you don't need to back this up as often as you do for your production database, and it holds all the data for reporting. What can this database be? It can be another OpenEdge QAD database, just like you're used to doing today if you're archiving. So that QAD database, you can just run the standard QAD reporting tools. More commonly, however, is this archive database that's the target of Pro2 Archive is a SQL Server or Oracle database. The reason for this is now you can expand your reporting beyond what QAD is providing you out of the box. You now can use Power BI, for example, and run reports on both current and archive data out of a single repository to be able to do complete reporting. So there's various configurations. This is deployed and it supports the QAD cloud environment for a reporting database. The reporting database could either be hosted in the QAD cloud as another QAD database, or it could be hosted on-premise as another QAD database, which doesn't make a lot of sense. You went to QAD cloud for a reason. So more likely you'd have it as a SQL Server database or an Oracle database that's on-premise local that you can then run the reporting that you want. Or you could put that database in another cloud. You could be in an Oracle cloud, or you could be in a Amazon or Azure cloud and put SQL up there. And so now you don't have any database on-prem, but you have a SQL Server database in the cloud outside of QAD's cloud infrastructure. And of course, it supports on-premise environments, with the reporting database also being co-located in the same data center, or if you want, that could be in a separate data center closer to where the people need to run the reports. For example, you might have a corporate headquarters that you want to have the SQL database near corporate headquarters, where the plants all have their QAD database closer to the plants. That would be an example of that. Or again, you could have the QAD plant databases near the plants, and you could be pushing to the cloud in a SQL Server database in the cloud. So just to show you what this would look like. So you have the QAD cloud. We'll talk about that one first. It's got 9 tables that are used to manage what we're replicating from the cloud to the source database that's on-premise. So the target database is on-premise, the source database is on cloud. We have an app server that sits in the cloud, and we are just pushing data local to a target side machine, wherever that local machine may be, maybe in another cloud service, or it could be on-premise. For the on-premise customers completely, it's the same thing, except we don't need to have that app server. So again, we have the replication software that's sitting on a machine that is just pulling data from the QAD environment and then pushing it to the QAD reporting environment. So what are these replication components? So the replication components are twofold. There is a change data capture component that is replication triggered based, or if you're running a more modern version of QAD 2019, then it uses OpenEdge 11.7. We would change that from replication triggers to be change data capture, which is a native feature of that 11.7 OpenEdge database. This keeps track of all changes, and it adds to a replication queue. And then we have a replication process. The replication process is a set of replicators that manage the replication queue. So it looks constantly at this queue to see, is there any update activity that needs to be pushed out to the target? So these are constantly looking for changes, and it will go fetch the source record and push it to the target, and it will provide real-time replication. So now a common question that comes up is, what happens if it's keeping track of all the changes? What happens when I do those deletes? I'm running the ADU utility and I'm deleting. Wouldn't those deletes get pushed to the target? Hence the target database becomes a exact replica of the source database. And this is where the special sauce comes in. So with the ADU utility, we tell this replication software to not delete the rows on the target, but instead mark them as being deleted. So we note that they were deleted, but they actually don't get physically deleted on the target. So what you end up with is you end up with a database that is on the left-hand side used for production, which is smaller. And then because the deletes are not getting pushed over to the reporting database, all the creates and updates are, that reporting database ends up being complete. It doesn't have the deletes. They're just marked as being deleted. We note that they were deleted out of the source database, but it has all the current data plus all the historical data. And I'll tell you that since we launched this about a year ago, we have 5 customers in production and with this, and they has helped them a lot. They've all come back to us and have talked to us to say how good this has been for their environment. So summarizing here, here's the 4-star benefits of Pro2 Archive. What you get out of this is you get a lean and fast production database. So it keeps your database fit and trim and gives you optimum performance. It gives you predictable downtimes for maintenance operations like a dump and load. It gives you predictable online backup times and online backup file sizes. It expedites migrations to the QAD cloud. So if you're going to move to the cloud, if you archive first, then you're not moving as much data to the cloud. There's no real need to move legacy data when you're moving to the cloud. That legacy data can stay in a SQL Server database on-premise, and you can continue to report on that SQL Server database. Likewise, it makes the upgrade process faster. Coming back to that lean and fast production database, one of the downtime operations is when you change your version of QAD from one version to another. It needs to go through and change the format of all the tables to the new format, and sometimes that can be very time consuming, and it may need to do a lot of data cleansing. If anybody has gone through an SE to EE upgrade and used the upgrade tools, you'll know that you run this tool several times to find all the data problems, fix the data problems, because it's got to go run and massage all the data. Well, if you can lessen the amount of data that it needs to massage, you're much better off, because then it'll run faster, and the chances of it coming across a problem is much less. So that's a recommendation to archive before you do an upgrade. And of course, it's the best practice for any database maintenance. So this comes back to making the ADU part of your operation. I'm going to bring us back to the beginning of, okay, so I want to archive. When do I want to archive? How do I want to archive? What are my timelines? That's not important anymore. It's really not important at all anymore. Obviously, you want to keep enough data in your production database so you can go back in time as needed operationally. But the decision of, do I keep 7 years of data in production, 2 years of data in production, 3 years of data in production, that decision goes away, because the reporting database now has all the data. So with having all the data, you don't really care what your archive boundaries are. You want to be rational and maybe archive everything older than 2 years and do it on a monthly basis. But then you have this reporting database on the right that has all the data, so that whole archiving timeline completely goes away. So in summary, Pro2 Archive, the ultimate solution for managing the growth of your QAD database without losing any historical data. So that's the end of my slides. I would like to say follow us on social media, on Facebook, Open Edge Progress, on LinkedIn, Showcase Progress Open Edge, and on Twitter, _Open Edge_. So at this point, we will open it up for questions.